Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question: the rape by deception argument I see used against trans folk, mainly trans women, who are stealth to claim that such trans women are inherently doing violence to others by trying to stay alive. With this context, do you still hold to the opinion that such trans women are guilty of something similar to rape as fraud is to theft? So glad you asked, because this is an ideal opportunity to remind you, my dear viewers, that every once in a while, I can be kind of a dipshit. Because when I answered Adam's question last week about whether or not it's morally equivalent to rape if someone sleeps with someone by lying to them or by, telling them something that wasn't true or concealing something from them, I never even considered the trans experience in the question. And that is completely on me. That's completely my own short-sightedness and my own shortcoming. And my own privilege, I suppose you could say, because it's something that I just have never had to worry about. And I don't think that was Adam's intention either, having read follow-up comments that he made in response to my answer to his questions. I don't think Adam intended to say that trans people who do not announce what genitalia they have, up front are guilty of some kind of crime or are guilty of the equivalent of rape. At least that's my understanding of Adam's attitude. And that certainly wasn't what I intended to say. So thank you for reminding me of that. Thank you for pointing that out to me and for showing me that in that case, my answer was very incomplete. And I should have explained that I do not consider trans women who fail to announce their transness to everyone that they date or hook up with are somehow guilty of a crime, morally or legally. I don't think there's any moral obligation to disclose that stuff either. So no, you're completely right. I should have made it more clear, and I would hate to think that anyone thought that I was one of those people that made that argument that, trans women have to be completely open and upfront about this, or else they're doing some horrible injustice to people. I think that whole position is horseshit. I reject it. I do not wish for that to be taken as my position. So thank you very much for asking that question and pointing out that and allowing me to make that clear to everybody, just in case anybody was wondering. Bruce Bartup: Steve, we all hate Trump, but the people most responsible for him being there are Vladimir Putin, 80% maybe, R. Mercer, 15%, the mainstream media, 2.5%, and the Republican Party, 2.5%, or split as you prefer. Are we hating effectively and efficiently, or has Trump hate run its course? I mean, now that the FBI, the heat is on his ass. You do make a good point that Trump himself did not arise out of a vacuum, and therefore our opposition, while it should be focused and centered on Trump, should not be reserved exclusively for Trump, because Trump, as awful as he is, and as many faults as he has, and as many dangers that are inherent to him, he is the product of many, many other things that we should also be very worried about. And I think the foreign influence that may have taken place, that may still be taking place in the Trump administration, is greatly concerning. And I hope that the FBI and the congressional investigation is able to get to the bottom of that. And I mean, to me, if I were splitting your percentages, I would give a lot more blame to the Republican Party, because ultimately it was the Republican Party and Republican voters who lifted Trump up to this position, who saw this bigoted, ignorant, self-promoting, misogynist, accused rapist, rape apologist, jackass, and said, yeah, that's our guy. Let's lift him up. And the mainstream media as well. The mainstream media who treated him as a pet, who looked at him and thought, oh, isn't that cute? Donald Trump's running for president. Ooh, lots of people are watching. Let's keep paying attention to Donald Trump. Let's keep normalizing him. Let's keep treating him as a serious candidate. That couldn't possibly backfire. So yeah, it's not just Trump who deserves our skepticism and our ire and our protest and our opposition. Trump deserves most of it. And I think just by necessity, Trump should be the recipient of most of the resistance and the opposition. But we must never forget that it was the Republican Party, it was the media, and indeed it was our culture in general. And all of us, to some degree, are complicit in this. Whether we liked Trump or we hated Trump, we are all participants in this culture, and we all bear some responsibility for allowing this to happen. So we should keep that in mind, and we should save some rhetorical ammo for targets other than Trump every once in a while, because he did not do it by himself. He was lifted up to that position by quite a few institutions and quite a few people, and they all deserve our scrutiny and our opposition and our effort to oppose them and reform them. It's not just a one-man show, unfortunately. It would be much easier if it were, but it wasn't. Ahoy, Erno. Question. I often hear progressives say they have to go vote in 2018 and 2020, but why? Trump lost the vote. The Democratic minority actually has an overwhelming majority in votes in both the House and Congress. Gerrymandering, voter suppression, and elimination of double names, over 1,000 voters in the case of various David Kims, etc. The upcoming census will allow Republicans to put another nail in the coffin of the American Republic. At which point will small d Democrats take back the country? When it takes 80+% to win an election? When elections are canceled? When will you do your Second Amendment duty and stand up to tyranny? I don't think we are quite to Second Amendment duty stage quite yet. And I do think that the things you mentioned, voter suppression, gerrymandering, etc., have been shown to be able to affect the outcome of elections at the local level, the state level, and now at the federal level. At least there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Trump's historically narrow electoral college victory was helped along, or perhaps even made possible in its entirety, by voter suppression efforts in a few key states. And of course, as you pointed out in your question, he did lose the popular vote quite solidly. But I think the reason why voter turnout is still so important, even with those elements in place that might serve to make voting seem less important, is that there's still such a gap between potential voter turnout and actual voter turnout that you can win elections by turning out the vote, even with voter suppression in place, even with gerrymandering, even with the Republicans doing everything they can to rig the game in their favor, to make it more and more difficult for opposition parties to beat them in elections. Voter turnout is still capable of overriding all of those. If enough people show up and vote for Democratic candidates, then all the voter suppression, all the gerrymandering in the world is not going to help them. So I think voter turnout and winning the elections through just sheer overwhelming force of getting as many people out there to vote for Democratic candidates as possible is the necessary step one. And then the necessary steps after that are, okay, now that we've regained power, now that we have majorities in legislatures, now that we have majorities in governorships, now that we have a Democrat in the White House, okay, now that we have a moment, then we need to fix gerrymandering, and we need to fix voter suppression. We need to repeal all of these voter suppressing ordinances and laws. We need to fix this situation so that we have a more fair and just democracy from now on. But we're still at the stage where popular vote and just overwhelming voter turnout can still win the day, despite the voter suppression, the vote suppressing mechanisms and the gerrymandering that is in place. So I think that's why people say get out the vote, go vote in 2018, go vote in 2020, because even though there are these mechanisms in place that can skew the outcome, that effect can be overcome by just sheer force of the popular vote. And that's why it's still so incredibly important to encourage people to go out and vote in every election. John Brockman, what changes would you make to U.S. elections? I'm thinking some form of universal voting would destroy the Republican Party forever. Yeah, see? Something like that. That's a great example. I don't know if universal voting in the sense of everybody must go vote would be something I would support. I mean, as much as I think people should be encouraged to vote, and dim a view as I take of people who could vote but choose not to, I do think you should have that option. I mean, I do think if you don't want to vote, you should be able to choose of your own free will not to vote. But I am hugely in favor of universal registration. I do not think you should be required to go somewhere or do something to opt in to being a registered voter. I think if you are a United States citizen, you should be automatically registered to vote. You shouldn't have to do anything else to become a registered voter if you are a citizen of the United States. Every eligible voter should automatically be a registered voter. And I think that would make a difference. I think mandating early voting, a certain length of time for an early voting period should be a federal law. Every states can run their elections any way they want, but it should be a federal law that every state-run election has to include a certain period before election day of early voting. I think voting access to all citizens should be something that is guaranteed, that everybody is able to have enough time and to have a polling place within their geographic area where they can get to without hardship so they can go vote. In terms of the electoral process itself, I mean, everybody says campaign finance reform. I would love to see federal elections be entirely publicly funded. I think presidential elections, congressional elections, senatorial elections should be completely publicly funded. There should be no such thing as campaign fundraising for presidential campaigns. Everybody should be drawing from the same pool of federal money, of public money. I think that's just a good idea. Getting rid of gerrymandering that was mentioned in the previous question. Doing away with gerrymandering completely. Let voting districts be determined by independent commissions or by judges or by some other apolitical process. I think that's incredibly important. So yeah, there are some very simple reforms that I think could yield very, very positive results, and would probably mean that Republicans would lose a lot of elections for a while, which I would also be completely happy with. Case against Faith 1. Hey Steve, how is the YouTube apocalypse affecting you? Many channels are complaining that YouTube's new advertiser-friendly policy is harming controversial channels. I know that for you, YouTube is a full-time job, and I think it would probably hurt you a lot. Do you see yourself having to get a more traditional job? I won't dismissively say get a real job, as YouTube is a real job, but it might not be a viable job anymore. On the other hand, I certainly know that you would be more advertiser-friendly than, say, The Amazing Atheist. So maybe you aren't affected as much. What's the story? I haven't been affected by it all that much, mainly because I don't make a huge amount of ad revenue anyway. For the last probably 3 or 4 years at least, my ad revenue has been declining fairly steadily. And I understand from other people that that's been happening as well. And I get the vast majority of my income from my Patreon campaign now. Patreon.com/Steve Shives, by the way, if you want to support this channel. As far as the demonetization of non-advertiser friendly videos, I've gotten a few of those. I've gotten a few and I have appealed them and their monetization has been restored. And I've had a very small number that I've appealed and YouTube has come back to me and said, nope, sorry, we can't monetize this. And honestly, that is, I know that it's affecting some videos that aren't controversial, and I know some of the videos I've had that were demonetized. I personally disagree with that decision and don't really see where they're coming from. But if the long-term effect of this is that people who make hateful content or abusive content or racist, misogynist, bigoted content find that kind of content to be less profitable and there is less of a motivation for them to make it, then I'm fine with that. In fact, I think that would be wonderful. I think if people like the YouTuber you mentioned in your question suddenly find their way of doing things unprofitable and find that that sort of content is becoming unwelcome on YouTube, I think that is a good thing for everybody, except for hateful professional trolls and abusers. And fuck those people. I don't think they should be on YouTube anyway. To me, the best way to deal with people like that is just to ban their fucking channels. To say, hey, you're an asshole. You attack people and abuse people and spread intolerance and bigotry. Do it somewhere else. Goodbye. You don't have a YouTube channel anymore. But this is good too. if you can dry up the market for this sort of thing by saying, look, we're not going to sell ads on your videos if you do this kind of shit. I think that's worth it. And it's unfortunate that a few people who don't deserve to have videos demonetized will be caught up in the wake, including myself from time to time. But again, if that's the tax that I have to pay for having a YouTube that in a few years is not the slime pit that much of it is, especially unfortunately in atheist / so-called skeptical circles, then I think that's worth it. Afflicted Reader. Hey Steve, longtime fan. The first video of yours I ever watched was your review of Superman Returns. I, like you and Ella. Afflicted Reader. Hi Steve, longtime fan. The first video of yours I ever watched was your review of Superman Returns. I, like you, am an enormous fan of the film. My friend Jim completely disagrees with me. He's a real ass who will worship at the altar of Steven Spielberg for the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, but will totally dismiss the many merits that Superman Returns offers. My question is, why do so many people hate on Superman Returns and yet show so much love for something like Man of Steel? Does it depend on the individual or their personal situation as a filmgoer? What does this say about the movie audience as a whole? Thanks. Well, yeah, it's personal taste, and personal taste is defined by millions of different tiny little factors that we probably could never ever truly know and quantify. I remember when Superman Returns first opened, the people who did not like it. I mean, there were some people, and there are still some people who don't like it because they don't like the plot. They think there are certain character inconsistencies. They don't like the way certain characters are written. They don't like the story. But there were a lot of people, especially the people who seemed to really, really hate it, who came at it with the, well, he doesn't punch anybody thing. And I just never understood that. There's a certain contingent of Superman fans who seem to view him only as an action hero, and all they want to see is Superman using his powers to fight people. And when they see a movie like Superman Returns, where Superman doesn't fight anybody, where Superman doesn't punch anybody, that specific criticism was levied more times than I can count. He doesn't even punch anybody. And obviously, they're not going to like a movie like Superman Returns. Obviously, they're going to prefer a film like Man of Steel, where punching people is all the motherfucker does. And if that's the case, that's fine. That's their taste. I personally don't understand that at all, because I think Man of Steel was a terrible film, and I think Batman v Superman was even worse. But boy, they had plenty of action. So if all you want is to see Superman punching people and knocking down buildings and blowing stuff up, there you go. The current DC cinematic universe is for you, my friend. You win. But personally, I prefer something a little more thoughtful, a little more elegantly filmed, like Superman Returns, and I would take that movie over the more recent DC superhero films in a heartbeat. But yeah, it's a matter of taste. Why do some people prefer it while other people prefer Superman Returns? I don't know. I grew up on Christopher Reeve and Super Friends and George Reeves, and maybe some people grew up on the 90s comics, which were much more action-oriented and much more sort of event-oriented, and maybe that's just the version of Superman that they sort of closed on and imprinted on and thought, that's Superman, that's who he is, that's what I want to see. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Who can tell? But yeah, it's a matter of taste. It's not a matter of right or wrong. People who prefer the more action-oriented, violent Superman, that's, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's not an objective question. But I will say, as I've said many other times, I personally don't get it. I don't get at all what's appealing about that version of Superman, and particularly those movies. But to each their own, I suppose. Like, personally, I enjoy just sitting here and answering questions at my leisure and just rambling on for fucking ever, answering a question about why do people prefer certain superhero movies. Like, that to me that's my idea of a good time. I can just sit here and bloviate forever. But other folks like something a little more pithy, a little quicker, which is why there's a whole back end to this video where I give much more pithy answers to things. It's a part of the video which, I don't know, I like to call it
The Lightning Round.
Corey Donaldson. Which of these grunge rock bands like Mother Love Bone, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Screaming Trees, and Soundgarden is your favorite? Of those, I would say Pearl Jam. I think Eddie Vedder is right up there with the all-time great rock and roll frontman. I would put him alongside like Freddie Mercury and Robert Plant as just legendary frontmen. So I would, on that basis alone, I would say Pearl Jam. Jay Bird, Bill Maher's a misogynist? A homophobe? He does more harm than good? Are you for real? Yeah. Yes, I'm for real. Yes. Are you? If you want to make a different judgment and say, look, it's unfair to call him a misogynist or a homophobe or to say he does more harm than good, that's up to you. You make your own judgment. People are entitled to their own opinions, but I don't really see how you can argue that he has repeatedly said misogynistic and homophobic and lately transphobic things. And for me, I'm just done with it. Lucas Hackett, hey Steve, which one of these would sound better to you? A crossover between Justice League and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? Sharing a jail cell with Jared Fogle? Or using toenails as currency? Well, I mean, I don't know how that economy would work, but a currency that I could always just grow more of. I mean, I don't know why I'm showing you my fingernails when you said toenails, but you know what I mean. I think I'd go for that. Just out of curiosity, like how long would that economy possibly last before it collapsed? But yeah, let's go with toenails as currency. Francois Lacombe, hey Steve, follow up to the running for president question. Would you consider aiming a little lower and try becoming a candidate for the Justice Democrats, either as a congressman or a senator? You look exactly like the sort of person they are looking for. I think I'm in the job that I'm best suited for, to be honest. I mean, Aaron Ra is running for office. Aaron Ra is running for the Texas State Senate. I wish him all the luck in the world. I think it would be amazing if he were elected. I think that's incredible, but it's just not me. Like I don't think I would be very good as a candidate or as an elected official. But again, I'm flattered that you think so. Adam Rainstopper, seeing as how I always ask you serious and kind of depressing questions, does my hair look good this color? Yes, I think your hair looks great that color. Actually, some of my favorite people are blue-haired people. Der Wunderbar, if you're going to watch just one Jackie Chan movie, what would it be? Mine would be Drunken Master. Oh, it's so difficult to choose. Probably Police Story 2. If I had to pick one Jackie Chan movie, I'd go with Police Story 2. Radical Bacon, what's the last item you checked out from the library? I don't even remember. It's been years since I checked something out of the library, like a physical book out of the library. I checked a book. I checked an ebook out of the library a while back, and strangely enough, I think it was actually The God Delusion. I had not read the God. I had never actually read The God Delusion until like 2 or 3 years ago, and I borrowed the ebook from my local library, and that was probably the last time I got something from the library. Since I got the Kindle, and I've been exclusively like an ebook type of guy, I mostly just buy ebooks or get them from some other free platform. I've shamefully I have not been a frequent patron of my public library for a very long time. Joe McClory, you have said you are generally not a fan of fantasy stories. Can you think of some examples of fantasy you do like? Is there any sci-fi that you are put off by because it leaned too heavily on fantasy tropes, but with replacing magic for future tech? For the second one, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but as far as fantasy that I like, I enjoy the Harry Potter films. I never read the books, but I greatly enjoy the Harry Potter films. I liked Conan the Barbarian, the Schwarzenegger movie. I never read any of the stories, but I really enjoyed Conan the Barbarian, the movie. But other than those, I'm sure there are other examples that I'm just not thinking of right now, but there are a few exceptions. But for the most part, especially like high fantasy, the sort of sword and sorcery, quasi-medieval, Tolkien, Game of Thrones type fantasy, it's just not my thing. It's just not my thing. So I can't think of very many exceptions to that. But there are a few. Just like there are an increasingly large number of exceptions to my distaste for musicals. Could I be changing? Anyway, that's the last question. That's it for the questions. It's time now for the shout out. And as has been my custom since the inauguration of Donald Trump, the shout out is going to go to a charitable organization that I think deserves attention and support. And that is filling a gap that is desperately needed during the Trump administration, protecting a vulnerable group. And one of the really shameful things that is being proposed by the Trump administration with their new budget that they proposed a few weeks ago is cutting funding for after-school programs, including school lunch programs and school breakfast programs, which is just unconscionable to me why you would want to cut funding or threaten funding for those programs. So the shout out this week goes to an organization called No Kid Hungry, which is a campaign to end child hunger in America. And you can learn more about this organization by going to their website, which is nokidhungry.org. If you, like me, are as outraged by the possibility that funding would be cut for public school lunch programs and after school programs, where in the case of some students who come from families living on low incomes, it's the only meal they get during the day. They depend on their school lunches, and they depend on their food that they get as a part of their after-school programs or their school breakfast programs, which a lot of states allow students who come from a family below a certain income to take advantage of. They depend on these meals, and to cut funding or eliminate these programs, as the Trump administration has proposed, is absolutely unconscionable and unforgivable. And if indeed the worst does happen and these programs do see their funding cut or eliminated, we need to have organizations that will stand in that gap and will fill the need for these children who are at risk of hunger. I can't believe we have to argue with our government over whether or not we should be paying to feed children at risk of going hungry. But apparently that is the situation that we find ourselves in when we have a Republican president and Republicans controlling the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. So one such organization that has been doing this work for years to raise awareness, to create and run programs to feed children and to teach children how to eat healthy and eat right, nokidhungry.org. Check out the organization, check out the website, do your homework on it. If it seems like your type of thing and you can spare a couple of bucks to support them, please consider giving a look and giving some support to No Kid Hungry, nokidhungry.org. I also want to remind you, as I do this time every week, to check out the Lemme Listen family of podcasts. These are podcasts that are created and hosted by my very good friend, Jason Harding, and there's a whole bunch of them. There is the original, which is Lemme Finish, which is co-hosted by Jason and Finite Atticus. There is American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, the hilarious improv comedy podcast. There is Filmtastic Voyage, the movie podcast, co-hosted by Mike and Alex. There is Cinetific, the movie science podcast, which is co-hosted by Professor Jason and Professor Aaron. There is Three for Adventure, the role-playing game adventure podcast. And there is, last but not least, Late Seating, the belated movie review podcast that is co-hosted by Jason and me, where we watch classic films, we give them a fresh review, and we decide whether or not they deserve their reputations, whether those reputations are good or bad. You can listen to our most recent episode, which went up last week, which is our review of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and you can prepare for our next episode, which will go up next week, by watching our next movie, which is the original classic Japanese monster movie, actually the Americanized version of the classic Japanese monster movie, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. That will be the subject of our next show. So watch that so you'll get all the jokes, and then you can listen to that episode, and you can listen to all of the past episodes of Late Seating and all of the episodes of all of the excellent Lemme Listen podcasts by going to lemmelistenpodcast.com. I sure do wish that you would. Well, folks, that is it for me for another week. I want to thank you, as always, for your questions and for your attention and for your support. Please do leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So please do ask a question, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Hey folks, one more thing before I go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives and become a patron for as little as $1 a month. There are added perks for those of you who pledge at the $5 per month level or higher. really helps me out. Not only does it enable me to continue making these videos, but it also helps me to pay bills and buy food and stuff. So I really, really appreciate the support. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.